Good Erev Yom Tov. As we enter the last days of Pesach, day 7 and day 8, this is a time to stop and think. This is a moment to appreciate where we are and where we're going. I'd like to start off by just wishing Mazel Tov to the families who are celebrating Smachos over this period of the last few days. First of all, a Mazel Tov to Aliza and Shlomi Leichton, who just celebrated the birth of a grandson born to Tamar and Aryeh Safran. Rabbi Safran and Tamar, and Mazel Tov to the great-grandmother, Mrs. Shirley Schachter. What beautiful, beautiful news. He should enter Bevrisoi Shel Avraham Avinoi Be'itoy of Izmanoi. And on that note, over the last days of Yom Tov, B'Shah Tov Mutzlachas, we're going to also be celebrating 3 shul brisses, obviously very quietly in their own respective communities. But to Lior and Moshe Berger, who are celebrating, God willing, B'Shah Tov, the bris of Miki and Yossi's little boy, and to Esther and Jonathan Liederman on the bris, God willing, of Miriam and Ephraim's little boy, and to Lisa and David Zizlowski, who are going to be celebrating the bris of Orly and Steven Zizlowski's little boy, Be'ezras Hashem, over the coming few days. And to the Grossmans, who just after Yom Tov will be celebrating the bris of their little grandson as well. What beautiful, beautiful tidings. It is special, especially around Pesach, to be celebrating a bris milah. Be'ezras Hashem, they should be B'Shah Tov Mutzlachas. We should only know Smachos going forward. I want to, at this moment, extend condolences to Mr. Nat Kaufman upon the loss of his beloved mother, Mrs. Margot Kaufman. And Nat will be sitting Shiva starting right after Yom Tov. That's going to be Thursday evening at his home. It's obviously, based on the times, it's going to be a private Shiva. And that Shiva is going to be commemorated via the phone, and he will be available on his phone through Wednesday morning up till the hours of 10 p.m. at night. God willing, we should only know Nichumim. As we approach this last day of Pesach, there are lots of conflicting emotions that are going through us in a general 7th, 8th day of Pesach, and specifically this time, especially this one, where we think about, on the one hand, the highs, the joy, the apex of the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim at Kriyas Yamsov, and on the other hand, we have this. There's a darker side. There's the fact that Yizkor always comes the last days of Yom Tov. There's a more somber aspect to this Yom Tov as well, and especially this Yom Tov, where unfortunately our community, the greater community, the world, has lost so many. It's especially sobering Yom Tov. Trying to put these ideas together, it's fascinating that as we read in the Shira, as we are going to, God willing, it's going to be privately, but we should open up the Chumash and we read Parashas Beshalach and we read the Shira on the 7th day of Yom Tov, we're going to see that the song starts off with an incongruity. It starts off with the following words, and you tell me what doesn't make sense. It says, Az Yashir Yisrael, Moshe Uvenei Yisrael Asashir Azos. Then they sang the song, Moshe and the children of Israel sang the song, and it goes on to describe the content of that song. But let's be a little careful about that. They sang. Sang is in the past tense. The word for sang is shar or sharu. Then they sang. But that's not what it says. It says, Az Yashir, then they will sing. That's a little bit of a mistake, seemingly. After all, they sang in the past, not in the future. Chazal say, of course, the Tanakh is being specifically incongruous here, based on the Medrash, to tell us that there is a future song which will be sung. Maybe not now, maybe not at the sea, but there will be a song which is going to be the song when we all witness Techias HaMesim. In fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin uses this pasuk as one of the hints to the fact that there will be resurrection of the dead. Because Az Yashir, then they will sing Es Ashir Azos. Mikan Remez L'Tchias HaMesim Min HaTorah. Here is a hint to the resurrection of the dead that it is found even in the Torah. Just to deepen and appreciate what that means, it seems like a little bit of a out of place reference. Meaning, here we are, we're going into the sea, we're about to escape Egypt, the Egyptians are on our heels, there's a cloud, there's fire, we're being protected. This is what a remarkable moment. And what are we worried about? well, there's going to be this time in the future, there's going to be Tchias. Is that what we really need to hear now? That's the place that we put Tchias HaMesim. It seems to be completely separate and completely a different topic to anything that's being talked about now. Why here? Why was this one place that the Torah chose to express in the innuendo that there is a remez, a hint to Tchias HaMesim? So Rabbi Mordechai Kamenetsky relates a very beautiful thought which was related by the Belzer Rebbe. It was right after the war, after the Second World War, and the Belzer Rebbe was congregating the She'eris HaPleita, those who had come through of his Hasidim, who had come through the Holocaust, and he turned to them and he was looking on one Shabbos. He wanted to sing Zmiros, and nobody could bring themselves to sing Zmiros. At a time of such tragedy, at a time of such unspeakable horrors, how is it possible for anyone to bring themselves to song? So the Belzer Rebbe sat around the table and he said the following Dvar Torah. This is how he turned to his Chassidim and he said, look, why is it that it says Az Yashir, and that's the remez, that's the hint to Tchias HaMesim? He asked exactly the same question. And he explained, we know, Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. We know that according to one explanation, it means that only 1/5 of the nation of Israel remained in Mitzrayim, were able to leave. The rest remained in the land of Egypt. And why was that? Because when you asked them, when you polled the nation of Israel at that time and you said, do you want to be an Israelite free nation or do you want to be an Egyptian? Most of them answered the question, we would like to be Egyptian. By the way, as a side point, today that's a scary question. If you were to ask all those associate as American Jews today, do you see yourself as a Jew first or an American first? It's sometimes going to be very, very hard to say that the statistics may be so different. We're at such a place, we're at such a point. Now, in Egypt at that point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu left behind the 80% of the nation of Israel who are quite happy as Egyptians. But they didn't just get left behind. They perished, as the Midrash tells us, in the plague of darkness. What a terrifying idea. In fact, it's almost, if you think about that, the numbers are just inconceivable. How it's possible for so many people to perish and disappear. And there's lots of discussions as to was the exact numbers or was the projections into the future of what they would be. Be it as it may, a lot of people were lost. If you think about that, says the Belzer Rebbe, was there a single person who was walking through Kriyas Yamsuf who was not suffering with the scar of somebody missing in their life? Was there a single family not affected as they walked to the banks of Yamsuf? Everybody was hurting. Everybody was crying. Everybody was bearing the loss, bearing the scars of loss of somebody who'd been left behind. There was somebody who wasn't there. And therefore there's this bittersweet experience as they're about to step into Yam Suf. Yes, we're going to go to liberation. We're going to be the chosen nation. But cousins, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, where are they? They're not with us. All those empty chairs and empty tables, where they will sing no more. Think about that for a moment. Says the Belzer Rebbe, that's specifically why. When Moshe Rabbeinu starts the song, he says, you know what? We're singing about the present, but there's also going to be a future. We don't believe that this world is the be-all and end-all. We don't believe that this is it. We've seen the end of the journey here. And understand that, yes, even though you're celebrating what seems to be a incomplete simcha, because there's been so much loss, understand Oz Yashir. There will be a time where we can all sing together. There'll be a time where we all do come together, even those perhaps who are not necessarily with us. There's a story told, Rabbi Frand tells the story about a lady who lost her son, Rahman al-Islan, in Melchemet Shlom HaGalil, in the Lebanon war, and she was a widow. This was her only son. And it was such a devastating experience to her, she really couldn't move on. She couldn't get to the next step in life. To such a degree that she didn't attend smachos, she would only attend funerals. One funeral, she was at a funeral of a friend and she was in the little Beis Kfaros in Yerushalayim and in Sanhedria, where her friend took her aside and said, I want to show you something. And she took her along to the kever of Rav Aryeh Levin, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, a great tzaddik of Yerushalayim, very, very special human being with, while reading about his biography, just a remarkable human being on so many levels. And she showed this widow, this bereft widow, the tombstone of Rav Aryeh Levin. Now you would imagine a man of the stature of Rav Aryeh Levin, there would probably be no space left on the tombstone to describe all his values and attributes. But he actually declined all of that. He declined even having a eulogy at his passing. And instead, on his tombstone is written, I actually have a picture of it right over here. This is the kever of Rav Aryeh Levin. And it reads as follows. After describing his name and when he died, that's all it says, Taina Shatzura B'tzura Chaim. He says the following, he says, inscribed on his gravestone, Ani mevakesh, I request, mikol mi she'avoy le'ishateach al kivri. Anybody who comes to pray by my tombstone, she'yomar b'peh moleh. A person should say with a full mouth, Ani ma'amin be'emuna shlema. I believe with a full faith, she'tiyeh tchias hamesim be'ez she'tal rotza me'ez haboireh. Yisbarach shmoy. There will be a resurrection of the dead at the time that Hashem so wills. Zikr la'adol netzach netzachim, whose memory, whose existence is for all infinity. And then it says in brackets, Mitzoach tzava'ah. This was the will of and testament of Rav Aryeh Levin. And it was as this woman looked at the tombstone of Rav Aryeh Levin, almost as if it was penned directly to her. That was the switch which was flipped, which allowed her to continue. It was that moment in life which allowed her to move forward in a very, very difficult life, in a life which we could not even imagine ourselves. I think this Yom Tov, perhaps we need to hear the Belzer Rebbe again. This Yom Tov, perhaps we need to listen to Rav Aryeh Levin's last will and testament. We need to appreciate that this is not a complete Yom Tov in many ways. There's a lot of suffering. There's been a lot of suffering in our community immediately, in our families, and in the world at large. But as we celebrate and as we sing that Shira, and we know that the Shira is somewhat incomplete, we should remember that Bnei Yisrael were also somewhat incomplete that year. And Moshe Rabbeinu gave them that encouragement to say, Az Yashir, that there will be a future song. And in that song, it'll be the harmony of harmonies. It'll be the Shir Hashirim of the future at the time of Tchias HaMesim, when all our loved ones, when all those who are missing from our tables right now, when all those who are missing from our community, the tremendous voids which cannot be filled, they will all be back. And together we will sing, Az, then, Yashir. Let us sing then, Bimheira V'Yameinu. In the meantime, have a meaningful and uplifting Yom Tov.